The strong embrace the wild that hides inside, keen instincts, primal physicality, and most of all, an unbridled, unquenchable rage. If you are the type of player who likes to then the Barbarian class is right for you. Welcome back, travelers. I'm glad to see you made it. I'm Colo, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Barbarian class in Baldur's Gate 3. A bunch of the information that I used in this video is from the Baldur's Gate 3 wiki at bg3.wiki. They do a fantastic job of maintaining all the information. Highly recommend checking them out if you need any detailed information about builds or anything like that. If you are new to this series of class guides that I've done, here's how it's going to go. First of all, we're going to go over the 12 generic levels of bonuses, increases, extra stuff that every barbarian's going to get as they're leveling up. Once we've gone through all 12 barbarian levels, we'll then go back and talk about each individual subclass. That way you know what each one of those has to offer you and which way you want to spec your character. So, for now, as it usually is, the best place to start is the beginning with a very basic question. What is a barbarian? When you hear the word barbarian, you are probably going to immediately imagine something like this. Or some other kind of huge, outrageously strong knuckle dragger that has no thoughts in their head, but all the strength in the world. You'll usually find these barbarians solving their problems by slamming an axe into it. While this can definitely be true, it isn't always exactly that simple. Similarly to the fact that not all musicians are bards, not every pissed off guy with an axe is a barbarian either. A true barbarian is able to tap into a rage so primal and powerful that it elevates them to superhuman levels of strength and tenacity. The source of the barbarian's rage is going to be augmented by their actual choice of subclass, from the animalistic teachings of the Wildheart to the blood-crazed Berserkers. And let's not forget the tidal wave of magical chaos spewing out of the wild magic barbarian. That's always fun. So now that we have a mental picture of what a barbarian is, let's talk about creating one. As with most of the classes in the game, there are a few different ways you can allocate your stat points when you're creating your barbarian, depending on how you actually want to play it. Most barbarian builds are going to end up prioritizing strength, constitution, and dexterity as the three main stats. Strength makes your character hit things harder and jump further. Constitution makes you tougher and more resistant to some status effects, and dexterity determines how quick and nimble you are, as well as your position in the turn order in combat with initiative rolls, and how much armor your character actually has with the dexterity AC bonus. Most barbarians are probably going to allocate their points heavily into strength and constitution, with a sprinkling of dexterity in there to help with their AC value, but it is absolutely not unheard of for a build that focuses entirely on dexterity and constitution, and strength is less important in those builds. Just be aware that if you go this route, you're going to have less weapon options available to you because you're going to have to use a finesse weapon in order for it to use dexterity as the actual attack stat rather than strength. But if you're fine with using finesse weapons, there's nothing wrong with going this route. You can make a perfectly viable character as a dex barbarian, no problem, no questions asked. As soon as you make your barbarian, you are going to immediately receive a fistful of proficiencies. You're going to be able to wield any weapon you find, as well as light or medium armor and shields. So basically, any gear you find, except for heavy armor, you're going to be able to immediately slap on and start using if you want. As far as heavy armor goes, you're most likely going to want to avoid heavy armor on your barbarian like the plague, because wearing this heavy armor gives you a debuff that basically disables most, if not all, of the effects of your barbarian's main class feature, the defining feature of barbarians, which is Rage. And speaking of rage, what is it and why is it so good? Why is everyone so excited about rage besides the fact that it's fun to scream and yell and smash things? Besides that, what's the big idea? At first level, every barbarian will have the ability to enter into a rage state as a bonus action. This is only available when you're in combat, and what it actually does is it grants the barbarian a 10-turn buff that will give them resistance to all forms of physical damage. So piercing, bludgeoning, slashing, all physical damage reduced by 50%. So that right there is already incredibly strong, as you can imagine. Most of the damage you're going to be taking in this game will be physical damage, just because you're going to run into way more guys that are going to run up and smack you in the face or shoot regular arrows at you or whatever than you will spellcasters or magically enhanced enemies. They're out there, there's tons of them, but most of the damage you're going to take by far is going to be physical. So this right here is basically a flat 50% damage reduction to most things. While under the effects of rage, your barbarian is also going to have advantage on all strength checks and saving throws. And then there's also this tiny little bonus of +2 damage to all of your barbarian's melee and throwing attacks, as well as improvised weapon strikes. So you guys are sitting there thinking, okay, Colo, you seriously just hyped up this BS for a freaking measly +2 damage buff? Yes, I sure did, and I'm going to explain why. Firstly, this is at level 1. This is your character's first level, and at this point of the game, you would be stoked to see a 10 damage hit. So having +2 damage on all of your attacks is immediately an insane percentage bonus of extra damage, just for nothing. You're gonna use the rage anyway to reduce the damage you're taking. You're also gonna be doing 20-30% bonus damage because of this +2 to every hit. It's crazy. And over the course of a playthrough, thousands of extra damage you're gonna be doing with this +2. This is one of the best parts of the rage. A few things you do need to keep in mind about your character's rage. First of all, if it lasts longer than 4 hours, you need to call your doctor. Rage prevents your barbarian from casting spells or maintaining concentration on spells that you've already cast, because, you know, they're in a state of mindless rage. Brain off, fists on. This is actually one of the biggest, most limiting factors about trying to multi-class barbarians with any kind of spellcaster class, because your rage directly impedes you from being able to do any kind of spellcasting. Trying to multi-class a barbarian and a spellcaster is almost entirely anti-synergistic in every situation. Multiclassing with a barbarian is usually going to be another one of the physical damage classes, another martial class like barbarian fighter or barbarian rogue. Those are some insanely good options, but you don't see many barbarian sorcerer multiclass builds out there, because why would you do that? Why not just multiclass that sorcerer with a paladin or something that makes sense? Anyway, I digress. You're not going to see many of those. If you guys know of any exceptions to this caster barbarian multiclass problem that I'm describing, let us know down in the comments. But for the most part, you're not going to be playing Professor Hulk or anything. You're either going to be smashing things or you're going to be casting, not both. Another small little tidbit, another little factoid for you, a little nugget of information here. While your rage can potentially last for up to 10 turns, it will automatically end at the end of your turn if you didn't attack somebody or take damage in that turn. So this can be used as a pretty good guideline for how barbarians should be played, or at least a potential way that they can be played. You are the reckless brawler. You are supposed to be trading blows. You're hitting them, they're hitting you. You're toughing it out and just chucking up middle fingers in their face and telling them to go F themselves, and then they're hitting you again. It doesn't matter. You're up there loving the fight. getting smashed in the face, and good. That's what you live for on a barbarian. They are notoriously good at resisting, ignoring, and just generally not giving a damn about taking damage. They have very high health pools. They have the built-in defensives, the 50% mitigation to most things we were talking about. There's all kinds of different ways you can build this. As we're going to talk about here shortly, some of the other bonuses you can get down the road and some of the subclass bonuses can make your barbarian even more tanky than you probably even think of. In short, if you absolutely cannot make an attack with your barbarian on a turn, and you're raging and you don't want your rage to fall off, look around you and see if there's any kind of environmental hazards that you can walk into. Is something on fire? Is there a pool of acid? Is there a alchemist flame you can throw on yourself and hurt yourself? You can keep your rage going if you absolutely need to. And a lot of times it doesn't cost you much of anything because your barb's just going to resist most of the damage. So it's not that big of a deal. Them taking 1 or 2 damage in a turn is nothing. So it's always an option to keep in your back pocket there. Keep it in your little loincloth there, hoss. And while we're on the topic of barbarian defensives, let's talk about the barbarian's other level 1 ability, unarmored defense. This is a passive ability which will add your barbarian's constitution modifier to their armor class as long as you're not wearing any armor. Hopefully you brought some dressing for all that word salad, but if not, let's figure out what it actually means. The idea is that your barbarian is extremely tough, which is represented by their constitution stat. So their bare skin is as tough as some light armor and even some medium armors would be. You are still perfectly able to wear light and medium armor as a barbarian without it impeding your rage, not going to cause you any problems. A lot of times it's just unarmored defense brings you up closer to the armors, but if you have actual armor, you'll have a higher AC and maybe also some other bonuses. So pay attention to what you're doing, but the ability to wear clothing that has cool bonuses on it as a barbarian is always there. Same thing with monks, and barbarians and monks multi-class pretty well together, so something to keep in mind. One thing to note that's a difference between barbarians' unarmored defense and the monks version is that barbarians are allowed to use a shield and still get the bonus. Monks cannot. So you can make your barb very, very tanky, as you're going to see. You will also be granted 2 rage charges at level 1. Every time you use rage, it will use one of these charges. These are going to replenish upon you taking a long rest. So at the very beginning of the game, you're probably not going to use your rage in every single fight unless you're long resting pretty often, which I do recommend doing, especially if you're a new player. And that right there is just level 1, folks. It's a really good snapshot of what barbarians are as a class. You get to kind of see where we're going with this. You know, you're the up close brawler, you're getting punched in the face, you're punching people in the face, you're swinging axes, you're throwing dudes across the room. That's who you are as a barbarian. You're strong, you're tough as nails, and you're angry about it. You're pissed. You're mad. So now that we got our barbarian made, let's talk about leveling one up. Upon reaching 2nd level, you will gain 2 more abilities. Danger Sense is a passive bonus that will give your barbarian advantage on dexterity saves against traps, spells, and harmful surfaces, as long as they are not currently blinded or incapacitated. This is very strong, especially this early on in the game. Having anything that will just passively allow your character to avoid damage or crowd control situations is very strong. What's even better than this is the other ability, Reckless Attack. This one, alongside Rage, is another one of the hugely defining features of the Barbarian class. From this point forward, whenever your Barbarian makes an attack, if you roll too low on your attack roll and it's gonna miss, the game will actually prompt you to use Reckless Attack, which will give you advantage on that roll even though it's already rolled. So basically what that means is it's just going to roll another die, and then whichever one of the two is higher, which you're hoping is the second one because the first one failed, it's going to go with that. So you can just get advantage and potentially push through an attack that was going to miss. The drawback to reckless attack, what makes it reckless, is that after you activate this, every enemy is also going to have advantage against your barbarian on attack rolls. So basically your barbarian is just throwing caution to the wind and potentially putting themselves either in harm's way, or I'm sure you guys, some of you have seen a scene in an animated movie or some kind of movie where one character gets impaled on a sword and walks into the sword so that they can then get their attack off on the other enemy. Something like that. That is a reckless attack. You give the enemy advantage on their attack against you, but because of your recklessness, you also get advantage on that current attack. And importantly, it will give you advantage on all attack rolls for the rest of your turn. So best case scenario is that if this is going to trigger, it triggers on your first attack. That way you have advantage on all of them. Reckless attack is insanely powerful when you combine it with things like Great Weapon Master, which reduces your chance to hit with attacks, but increases the damage that you deal with them when they do hit. Well, reckless attacks purely increases your chance to hit with attacks. It gives you advantage, which increases your chance to hit. So it helps mitigate some of that attack penalty, and you still get the damage bonus from landing harder hits. It's a freaking fantastic combo, and it makes sense. You think about a barbarian, and in a lot of cases, you're thinking about a person using a giant two-handed sword or a huge axe cleaving people in half. So swinging around a huge weapon recklessly fits very well. Can I see a barbarian using two one-handers? Absolutely. At third level, you're going to receive a third rage charge. So now you can rage one more time per day, which is always nice. You will also be allowed to choose your subclass at this level. But as I said before, we're going to wait till we get through all 12 generic barbarian levels, and then we will come back to these subclasses individually. At fourth level, you will be granted your first feat. I mentioned Great Weapon Master before, and there are also a few other great feats to consider, depending purely on how your party is set up, what role your barbarian is trying to fill in the party. Are they going to be a ranged DPS character utilizing a throwing build where you throw weapons and they return to your hand? Or are they going to be up in the front lines tanking with a sword and board setup? Or are you going to be using the two-handed axe that we were just talking about, cleaving through hordes of enemies as you're, a huge damage dealer? There's a couple different ways you can go. Savage Attacker is insanely good for melee builds. Tavern Brawler is a fan favorite because of how absolutely insanely OP it is for strength-based builds, especially if you're built around throwing weapons or unarmed attacks. So if you wanted to make some kind of barbarian monk unarmed strikes build, Tavern Brawler basically just makes your guy way stronger. Just by taking that feat, you're instantly stepping yourself up to an S tier build, basically. Some players even refuse to use builds that include Tavern Brawler, or they'll do challenge runs that strictly forbid the use of Tavern Brawler because of how outrageously OP it is. It's considered to be the best feat by a lot of people, and in a lot of circumstances it is objectively. There's arguments for a few others being the best overall, but there's no argument that Tavern Brawler is freaking OP. It's crazy good. So on that same note, if you are a new player, or you're just looking for something to mess around with and you want a really strong, fun build, Tavern Brawler Throw Barbarian, holy moly is it effective. You will be deleting people left and right with that build, and it's freaking fun. You stand wherever, you can position yourself really well because of your high jump distance, and just chuck whatever throwing weapons you have that are going to return to your hand, and you just keep throwing it over and over again. You can pick up bad guys and throw them across the room. You can throw whatever, explosive barrels. It's awesome. It's super fun, super simple, but it's beautiful in its simplicity. As always though, I like to say this during the feat portions of these videos: choose whatever your party needs the most, and don't be afraid to use ability improvement to buff your main stats on the feat levels. At 5th level, your Barbarian will receive the Fast Movement passive, which will increase your movement speed by 10 feet, which is a massive increase. The ability will not work if you are wearing heavy armor. So once again, really trying to drive home this point here, your Barbarian is not supposed to be wearing heavy armor. It disables most of the reason why you're playing a Barbarian. So if you're like dead set on wearing heavy armor, just spec into something else. Instead of going Barbarian, go Fighter. You'll get heavy armor automatically that way, and you don't lose half your class's abilities by doing it. Now, is there a way that you can build a heavy armor Barbarian tank character or something like that? I'm 100% positive that there is, and there's probably a way to make it super good. But in most situations, if you intend to use the actual core mechanics of the Barbarian class, stay away from heavy armor. Wear medium. Imagine your Barbarian running around in like leather and furs from a tiger that they freaking killed with their bare hands this morning. Can you wear more civilized armor? Absolutely. Sure, you can imagine a different thing too. But Barbarians in full plate armor, it's possible. Not going to be as common though. More importantly though, and super excitingly, you are going to receive the extra attack passive at this level. This will allow your Barbarian to perform 2 attacks per action each turn from now on. This is one of the single strongest buffs that any character gets in this game, as it almost doubles your total potential damage per turn. It's not a true perfect doubling, but it's almost doubling your potential damage. You get a massive buff from this. That's why everybody says that from level 1 to 5 is the hardest part of the game, because once you get to 5th level, your martial classes get extra attack and your casters get their 3rd level spells, which includes Fireball and Lightning Bolt, and a whole different part of the game just unlocks at this point. You guys just basically, you become mini bosses from that point forward. And then once you get towards like level 9, 10, 11, depending on what your builds are, you become the bosses of the game at that point. You're definitely going to feel the difference of this extra attack passive, because now you can kill one enemy and then use their body as a weapon to kill their buddy in the same turn. Neat. 6th level will grant you a 4th rage charge, which is always nice to have. You will also be granted a subclass specific bonus, which we will cover in a bit. At 7th level, you'll get the Feral Instinct passive ability. Your Barbarian's instincts have been sharpened to such a point that they are now impossible to surprise, and they have a permanent +3 to initiative rolls from now on. This is very, very powerful for a passive buff. It will absolutely cause your Barbarian to go very close to the beginning of almost every combat encounter you have. You might have a Gloomstalker Ranger that's going first or something like that, but your Barb's going to be 2nd or 3rd in most combat encounters if they're not first, which is awesome because Barbarians are really good at inflicting the game's best crowd control effect on targets. And as everybody knows, that is death. Killing targets is the best way to stop them from doing what they were doing. It's kind of hard to do an activity. Like imagine you're trying to do arts and crafts. Imagine you're sitting there at a table, making some kind of glue project, you're eating the glue and stuff, and then all of a sudden somebody walks up and slams a giant axe into your head. It's going to be kind of tough to finish your art project, you know what I mean? 8th level will grant you a choice of another feat. The same things I said before apply here also. If any of the actual feat effects sound good, take them, try it out, and if you don't like it, I almost forgot to mention our old buddy here, Withers. This is the guy that allows you to respec your character from the ground up for a very small price, which can then be pickpocketed back from him with no consequences. Doesn't matter if he catches you trying to pickpocket it, he does not care. Withers doesn't even care if you sit there and unload spells at him. He does not care what you do because you can't hurt him. There's nothing you can do that's going to affect him. The only reason he even makes you pay the money is because of balance and because he's a freaking gangster. Anyway, pick a feat or bump your main stats and let's continue. 9th level will grant you the Brutal Critical passive ability. Your Barbarian is so friggin' strong, so ruthless, that when they crit with a melee weapon or an unarmed attack. Instead of rolling one additional damage die, they will roll an additional damage die. While we're adding things, remember that 2 damage that we've been adding to each hit because of rage? Let's add another 1 and make it 3 damage per hit. Doesn't sound like a lot, but that is a 50% increase to that 2 damage buff. Who knew barbarians would be so good at math? 10th level is another subclass bonus level, and I just don't want to talk about it, okay? I'm not in the mood, all right? Okay? I have a headache. 11th level will grant you the Relentless Rage passive. This one is crazy for lore reasons, and it's awesome in actual gameplay. 1 time per short rest, if your barbarian drops to 0 health while they're raging, you instead just drop to 1 health. I used to play WoW a lot, so I call abilities like this cheat death mechanics because of a rogue talent from way back in the day. But regardless of what you call it, anything that allows you to get killed and then just decide that you aren't going to get killed and you'll just go ahead and keep on living instead is pretty sweet. And finally, upon reaching 12th level, you will be granted 1 final rage charge, bringing you up to a total of 5, and you're going to get a choice of another feat. So now that we have covered the generic bonuses and abilities that every single barbarian is going to unlock as they level from 1st level to 12th level, let's leap our way back to 3rd level and talk about the first subclass, Wildheart. Your attunement with nature and its beasts inspires your rage, empowering you with supernatural might. Right away, as soon as you pick this subclass, you will be granted the Speak with Animals spell, which your barbarian can cast on themselves once per long rest, and it will last until long rest. So basically, as long as you don't forget to cast this every day, your barbarian can now talk to animals pretty much forever, which is way more valuable than you might think, as sometimes animals have quest hints or will literally give you or sell you items that you can use to progress quests, things like that. Like talking to the animals can actually be very productive. And also, some of the most hilarious conversations that you can possibly find in Baldur's Gate 3 are with animals. So I almost consider it mandatory to have somebody in your group that has access to speak with animals. Doesn't necessarily have to be your normal face character. You just need somebody that can talk to them. You will also get to choose which bestial heart effect you want to add to your rage. You have 5 options, and they can each have pretty dramatic effects on your actual gameplay. So we're going to go over them individually so you know which direction you want to go with your barbarian. First up, Bearheart. This one is my personal all-around favorite, and it's the one that I would recommend any new players to take if you're really unsure or you can't decide, or if you just want something that is a reliable, strong option. Bearheart is right there. While raging, you will be allowed to use Unrelenting Ferocity once per rage. It costs an action, and it will heal your barbarian for a small amount of health. This ability has uses, but you could also completely remove it from your action bar and probably never notice. Spending an action, which could be used to perform multiple attacks to heal yourself for a very small amount of health, is just not going to be great in most situations. It is useful though, and I don't recommend taking it off your action bar. Just know that you're probably not going to be clicking this button very often. The important thing about the Bearheart is its rage effect. Instead of granting you resistance against physical damage like it did before, this rage effect will grant you resistance to all damage types except for psychic. So, as you can imagine, bear barbarians can easily be built as some of the tankiest characters in the entire game. I absolutely recommend trying it out. It's very fun, very easy to figure out and make use of. No crazy setups you have to do. If you can rage, you can pretty much get the most out of Bearheart because you get it right away when you rage. All that passive mitigation. It's ridiculous. Eagleheart is up next. This one can also be very powerful once you understand a few things about how it works. While you are raging, your enemies will have disadvantage on opportunity attacks against you. You can use dash as a bonus action, which is incredibly good, and you also get access to the diving strike skill. This is an eagle barb jumping off a stack of crates like she's in a WWE cage match and she's about to slam somebody through a freaking table. As long as you are at least 5 feet above your target, diving strike will allow your barbarian to leap down onto the target, dealing weapon damage to them and knocking them prone. This is a very powerful crowd control effect that can be used to set up a turn of huge burst damage against the target while they're lying prone. Your barbarian won't take fall damage from using this ability, and your maximum range is based on your barb's jump range. Anything that increases the jump range should increase this ability's range by the same amount. Next up, we've got Wildheart. While under the effects of this rage, your movement speed will be increased by 15 feet, which is a massive amount of mobility. You will also be able to use the Primal Stampede ability. This will cost an action and some movement speed, and your barbarian will basically just charge directly through whoever is in their way, damaging them and potentially knocking them prone if they fail a strength save. Like I just said a minute ago, knocking targets prone is very powerful, and this can also be used as a get out of jail free card, because when you charge through targets while using this ability, it does not give those enemies a chance to make opportunity attacks against you, so you can use this purely to reposition if you need to, which is always strong. It's not always going to be the best option, but sometimes it might be. This one's definitely not a bad ability by any means. You can get a lot of use out of it, and if you have your team set up to take advantage of targets being knocked prone, you can really do some crazy moves with this. Next up, we have Tiger Heart's Rage effect, which will increase your jump distance by 15 feet, which, as you can imagine, is awesome because mobility increases are always good in this game, and it will allow you to use the Tiger's Bloodlust skill. This is a conal cleave ability that you can use to hit up to 3 targets for half weapon damage each. What does that mean, boys and girls? That means unless you're hitting at least 2 targets with it, it's going to deal less damage than a regular hit. If you hit 3 targets with it, it'll do a total of 150% possible damage, which is excellent. Each target that you hit with this ability will also begin bleeding for 2 turns, which will cause additional damage per turn. But more importantly than that, setting up bleeding targets is going to be a catalyst for some barbarian builds later on. This is very good to have, and you're definitely going to be making use of it. And finally, for the last available Beast Heart option, the Wildheart. This rage will allow you to use the Inciting Howl skill, increasing any nearby party member's movement speed on their next turn by 10 feet. This can be very good if you group your party up for it, but a lot of the time your action would be better spent elsewhere. It's not bad to have though as a utility option. The second part of the Wildheart's rage effect is more confusing. You will passively grant your allies advantage on melee attack rolls against any enemies who are within 7 feet of your barbarian. So, if you can get your barb up into the fray, you are basically a walking damage buff for the rest of the party. Wildheart is easily the most restrictive and niche option, and honestly, I don't recommend it for most players. It is perfectly viable to use if you want to. There are builds that can utilize this to pretty good effect, but if you're just looking for a barbarian character to run in and, I'm going to keep using this example, slam an axe into somebody's face, this is not necessarily the best choice that I would recommend. It is still viable though, and you can absolutely beat the game with a wolf barb, no problem. Regardless of which animal heart you decide to go with, you will also get to choose some Wildheart barb specific facial piercings for your character if you want. You don't have to. You can actually pick any of the clan styles regardless of which beast heart you decide to go with, which I think is very cool. And you can also opt for just retaining the same jewelry your character already had. Level 6 is where you're going to get your next subclass bonus, and as you can see here, it's another list of available choices. These are mostly passive buffs, and some of them are incredibly strong or versatile, so buckle up and let's go through this list. Bear. This one doubles your carrying capacity and grants you permanent advantage on strength checks. I personally love using this one for the simple fact that I can have my barbarian carrying around 1,000 pounds of junk and not have to worry about the weight. Chimpanzee. You gain resistance to fall damage, and you can blind targets by throwing camp supplies at them. I'm almost 100% positive this is supposed to be a joke about monkeys throwing poop, but that may just be because I have the brain of a child inside of this chiseled Spartan body. Like a golden god, ladies and gentlemen. Oh my god, Colo, how do you stay in such fantastic shape? Crocodile. Your movement speed increases by 10 feet while you're standing on water. So I can only imagine a barbarian skating across a tiny puddle like it's a slip and slide. But I have to wonder why they can't just wet the ground with the blood of their enemies if this is the case. Yeah, blood is sticky, but if you throw down enough of it, it's probably slippery. I'll do some more research and get back to you guys on that. You will also have advantage on your saving throws against slips, trips, and falls when you're standing on a slippery surface. This is OSHA's favorite option. Eagle. You will gain 40 feet of non-magical dark vision and advantage on perception checks. Eagle eyes, pretty much exactly what you would expect from this. Not bad by any means, but some of the other options might be stronger. Elk. This one grants you an aura, which will increase your allies' movement speed by 5 feet, as long as they are within 60 feet of the barbarian. This is another very easy to use bonus that will help your entire party in a lot of encounters. Giving everybody an extra 5 feet of movement is a very, very good buff. Not a bad choice by any means. Honey Badger. This one is a unique case of either being extremely awesome or totally worthless, depending on a few factors. If your barb is poisoned, frightened, or charmed at the start of their turn, they have a 50% chance to automatically enter rage without using a rage charge. Honey badgers are pissed off at the world and aren't afraid of a little bit of poison, let me tell you. Also, another important tidbit you might not know, eating rotten camp supplies will poison your character, so these can be used as a free rage batteries if you're okay with your barbarian digging through the trash for their meals. Maybe this should have been called raccoon aspect. Little trash pandas climbing around in there getting all your trash. Stallion. Dashing grants you temporary hit points equal to 2 times your barbarian level. So, if you don't multi-class your barbarian at all, you can use dash to instantly gain 24 temporary hit points at the end of the game. These will not refill until they are expended, but as soon as they're used up, you can dash again and basically just make your barb tankier than ever before through self-healing. If you do multi-class your barb, let's just say 6 levels of barb, 6 levels of monk. Your barbarian level is only 6 in this case, so each dash would grant you 12 temporary hit points. Still nothing to sneeze at. Tiger. You add an additional strength modifier to attack rolls against bleeding or poisoned targets, and gain proficiency in survival. Survival proficiency is nice to have, but it's not the reason you're going to take this aspect. Adding an additional strength modifier to your attack rolls is going to make your barb much more likely to land hits on a bleeding or poisoned target. It won't increase the damage per hit, but it will increase your likelihood of hitting, which is still a good DPS increase. Wolf. You and allies within 60 feet of you add your dex modifier as a bonus to stealth checks. This could actually be very good if your party is built around being sneaky and can be used to position your team much more easily before an ambush. It's not bad as a passive, but for most situations, I feel like wolf aspect doesn't hold up against the other options. Once again, it is perfectly viable though, and if you want to build for it, I think that's a cool idea, and I think you're going to have a good time. And lastly, we have Wolverine. When you attack a bleeding or poisoned target, you inflict maim on them. As you can clearly see, Wolverine aspect has the same requirements that Tiger aspect does, so it will be activated in the same ways. Maiming a target basically roots them in place until they receive healing, which will remove the bleeding and maimed conditions from them. This can very easily be comboed with other effects that benefit from an immobilized target, which is a lot of effects. The animal aspect you choose will have a very large and fundamental impact on how your barbarian plays, so make sure you think carefully about what kind of play style you're going for. Also remember that you can try these out like feats and then respec at withers and choose different ones if you wish. That way you can actually playtest them in combat encounters and see which ones you like the best. At 8th level, Wildheart Barbs receive the Land's Stride Difficult Terrain passive. Difficult terrain effects will no longer slow you down, but importantly, you are not immune to other effects of some difficult terrains, like slipping on ice, for example. So keep that in mind. This is still absolutely awesome to have as a no-cost passive. Just don't think you're going to be able to walk across ice without risking slipping. And finally, at 10th level, you will be allowed to choose a second animal aspect effect from the same list we discussed just a few seconds ago. In case you forgot, I'll go back over the whole list now. Just kidding, I'm not doing that. I will mention a few things though, now that it's clear to everyone that you get 2 of these. There are obvious synergies available. Tiger and Wolverine both require the exact same debuffs on a target to be activated, so they will both activate at the same time against the target with one of those effects. There are also synergies between the animal aspects and the actual beast hearts you had to choose from earlier. If you recall, for example, the Eagle Heart's rage effect allows you to use dash as a bonus action, which would pair very nicely with the Stallion aspect, allowing you to generate those temporary hit points each turn as a bonus action instead of a full action. I really cannot overstate how tanky you can become if you take advantage of these kind of effects. But as I said at the very beginning, Bearheart is always there as a safe, strong option if you don't feel like messing with any of this. You just want to set it and forget it barbarian character to have in your group. It's a great choice. You can't go wrong. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we have covered all of the Wildheart Barbarian's subclass specific bonuses. As you can see, there are a pretty wide range of playstyles available within this subclass alone. So I highly recommend trying out a few different ideas and finding which playstyle you have the most fun with, or which one works the best for your group. As for our examples from other media, the character I've chosen to represent the Wildheart Barbarian is Victor Creed, or as he's more commonly known, Sabretooth. He's a mutant, he has multiple animalistic features such as claws and fangs, but he also has greatly enhanced senses and instincts because of his mutation. Sabretooth has a very powerful regenerative healing factor, which allows him to heal from wounds that would be absolutely devastating to a normal person. He can reattach and heal severed limbs. He's immune to most toxins. He ages at a very slow rate, and he's extremely resistant to fatigue toxins that are normally produced in the muscles due to physical activity, which gives him an extremely high level of endurance even when he's fighting at full ferocity for days and days on end. In some stories, Sabretooth has also had adamantium bonded to his bones like Wolverine does. I think we all know what that means at this point, right? It means he can cut down ladders like a cartoon character now. Don't even get me started on that freaking movie. That abomination of a film makes me want to just go berserk. Berserker. Violence is both a means and an end. You follow a path of untrammeled fury, slick with blood, as you thrill in the chaos of battle, heedless of your own well-being. Upon choosing this subclass, instead of choosing a beast heart to augment your rage effects like the Wildheart subclass did, your rage is going to turn into the Frenzy ability. You will get the same benefits of normal rage, but you will also be allowed to use the Frenzied Strike and Enraged Throw abilities, and you can make improvised weapon attacks as a bonus action. There are a few things you need to know about each one of these options, because they can be very powerful if you use them properly, but you can also fall into a bit of a trap if you don't, so let's take a look at them real quick. Frenzied Strike basically allows your Berserker to make a regular melee weapon attack for the cost of a bonus action. Now you might be sitting there and thinking, holy shit, that's outrageously powerful. That means that Zerker Barbs can make 2 attacks per turn at 3rd level and then 3 attacks per turn at 5th, and you would be correct. It is absolutely outrageously powerful, and that's why there's a bit of a drawback stapled onto it. Every time you use Frenzied Strike, your Barbarian will accrue a stack of Frenzied Strain. This is essentially your Barbarian's body and mind being put under such intense pressure by the amount of physical force they're exerting that they begin to suffer some consequences instantly. Each stack of the Frenzied Strain debuff will add a -1 to all attack rolls your Barbarian makes for the remainder of your current frenzy duration. So, each time you use this ability, your attack accuracy gets reduced until eventually you will lose the effects of frenzy and all your debuff stacks will immediately fall off as well. This is the trap that I mentioned earlier. Frenzied Strike can be insanely good, and you will absolutely find circumstances where it is the best option, and you're going to be super stoked to have this on your bar. Just don't go clicking this one every turn unless you have some kind of build that can work its way around that attack roll penalty. So now that we've talked about the skill that you probably shouldn't use every turn, let's talk about the skill that you probably should use every turn. Enraged Throw is essentially the same exact thing as Frenzied Strike, except instead of making a melee weapon attack, it will allow you to throw an object or person for the cost of a bonus action, dealing damage and knocking the target prone. Enraged Throw always knocks the target prone if it hits, and if it was another creature that you threw, that one will also be knocked prone with no saving throw. Oh, and one more thing. There is no stacking debuff attached to this one like there is with Frenzied Strike. You can just keep on chucking shit and never have any drawbacks. And because of the Tavern Brawler feat we discussed earlier, remember that super OP bonus that I talked about? It is super easy to build an entire Barbarian around throwing weapons and objects multiple times per turn, annihilating every enemy in sight. Your Barbarian can literally be a freaking menace, just hurling everything across the room that they can get their hands on. And I've mentioned them before, but to really highlight, there are some weapons in the game that are returning weapons. You throw them and they will instantly appear back in your character's hand, and you can just keep throwing them. So you don't have to worry about carrying a stack of javelins anymore or spears or whatever you've been throwing. You could just carry that one weapon now and throw it. It'll reappear in your hand. You throw it again, rinse, repeat. Also, improvised weapon attacks are basically just when you look around and find something to hit someone with. You can pick up their dead buddy and swing them like a flail, which will deal damage based on the weight of the object you're swinging. This will also be counted as an unarmed melee attack and will benefit accordingly from Tavern Brawler, so swing away, champ. Your Berserker's next upgrade will come at 6th level in the form of Mindless Rage. This is a Berserker-specific passive ability, which will make your frenzy so intense that your mind is basically completely shut off to outside influences. You aren't doing any thinking anymore. Thinking time is over. It's time. What this actually does is make your barbarian immune to charm and frighten effects while they're frenzied, and the calm emotions spell can no longer force them out of their rage. Which is something that all y'all should know, by the way. Calm emotions can be used to force any non-berserker characters out of their rage states. It will affect your teammates too, so be careful where you aim it. But this is a barbarian video, so we're not talking about calm emotions anymore, lads and lassies. We're talking about a frenzied berserker who is so friggin' pissed off she can't even think straight anymore, and she's here to beat your brains out. At 10th level, you will receive your final subclass bonus. Intimidating Presence is an action ability that you can use to frighten a target unless they pass a wisdom save against your Berserker Barbarian's Charisma spell save DC. For anyone who didn't understand that nonsense I just said, it basically means this ability is not very good at all. It might be usable if it used your Barb's strength value for the spell save DC, but as it stands, this ability is almost entirely worthless in most situations. You can attempt to frighten a single target within 30 feet of you for the cost of an entire action. You could have attacked 2 or more times with that action, but instead you decided to glare menacingly across the room at one of them, and there's a good chance that person is going to pass the super low DC spell save, and they're just going to see you doing this shit from across the room. You can absolutely level your Berserker Barbarian all the way to 12th level, and you will have a very, very strong character. No questions asked. But this skill is pretty much a neon sign begging you to put your last 3 levels into something else. Something, for instance, like Thief Rogue, which will grant you an additional bonus action per turn for those 3 levels. Pop Quiz class, who remembers what we can do with a bonus action? That's right. We can perform an entire attack or enraged throw with that bonus action every single turn. So now you can do 4 throws per turn with Tavern Brawler bonuses added in before you even consider haste or any other buffs like that on top of it. And 4 throws with Tavern Brawler is like calling in a friggin' artillery strike from the Death Star. Whoever was there, down yonder, yeah, they're dead. But that's just a theory. A build theory. Oh, and you can also use a full action every turn to maintain that creepy stalker face. So you can just keep on throwing turns into the trash if you so desire. I do love having options. Speaking of options, let's talk about who I've chosen to represent the Berserker subclass. This one was actually kind of tough because almost every single character that fits the Barbarian archetype could be seen as a Berserker, depending on how they're portrayed. I thought about using Wolverine here since I talked about Sabretooth earlier, and they're pretty much like sworn enemies, rivals. But when I think of a Berserker, a character who is so driven by rage that it essentially overrides all other thought and emotions from their mind, turning them into an unstoppable beast, there is one character who clearly stands above the rest. The Incredible Hulk. I'm not even going to get super far into the insane feats that this character has performed over the years, because we'd have to get into some crazy nonsense like literally punching holes in the fabric of time and reality. Just like Superman, Hulk stories have kinda gotten out of hand over time. If we use the less absurd stories and just look at some of the stuff that he's been through and some of the stuff that he's done, we are still going to be talking about almost nothing but absurdities. The Hulk has literally limitless strength, stamina, endurance, and ludicrously increased speed and reflexes. He is a walking natural disaster. When the Avengers show up with the Hulk and he ends up getting too enraged, the rest of the Avengers' main priority instantly has to shift to stopping him. The Hulk cannot be allowed to run rampant on Earth because he is capable of such massive levels of destruction. He has to be contained, and using him on the front lines of combat is often an extreme last resort. It would be like summoning a giant ass demon to help you fight an evil dragon. Yeah, the dragon was super dangerous and maybe you needed the demon's help to beat it, but now you have a pissed off demon to deal with also. You're still in a boss fight, you just brought the boss with you. That sounds like it would be pretty wild. So anyway, let's talk about the Barbarian's final subclass in Baldur's Gate 3, Wild Magic. The wild influence of magic has transformed you, suffusing you with arcane power that churns within you, waiting to be released. This subclass is the one you choose if you just love RNG. For anyone who doesn't know what RNG stands for, it means random numbers gang up on you and beat you senseless in the back of a New York City alleyway. So now you understand why they went with the freaking abbreviation. Every time you rage as a wild magic barbarian, you will trigger a wild magic effect to also occur. Very similarly to wild magic sorcerers and their crazy random shenanigans. Except for the barbarian, you won't be turning yourself into a sheep or blasting yourself with a fireball. Here are the available wild magic effects that can trigger when you rage. Weapon infusion. This one is one of my favorites because it reminds me of playing a different barbarian subclass, which is usually the best option. I jest, but really? Why? It adds 1d6 force damage to your weapon, grants the weapon the light and thrown properties, and if you do throw the weapon, it will instantly return to your hand, just like the returning weapons we discussed earlier. Magic Retribution. This one is basically just thorns. If you've ever played an RPG with a thorns mechanic, you know what this is. You get hit, the attacker takes a small amount of retaliation damage as though they were punching a person covered in thorns. Not bad, not too exciting. Protective Lights. This effect can actually be super good if your team has a melee heavy focus. Adding +1 to your AC is a very good bonus, and if you can get the benefit on multiple allies, including pets and summons by the way, this can be a very, very powerful overall group buff. If you roll this one, it's usually not disappointing to see. Intangible Spirit. Each turn, you can use a bonus action to summon a spirit jellyfish within 33 feet of yourself. This jellyfish will self-destruct and cause 1d6 force damage to anyone in a 15-foot radius unless they pass a DC 12 dex save, which is hilariously easy to pass. So yeah, neat. Bolt of Light. This is Iron Man's Unibeam. You fire a big old laser beam out of your chest once per turn as a bonus action. This will deal 1d6 radiant damage and blind the target for 1 turn unless they pass a super easy to pass DC 12 Constitution save. Yay! You'll notice that all of the effects that cause a target to make a saving throw will have a DC of 12. This does not scale into endgame and basically makes these effects much less likely to land as you progress through the game, which is always fun. Vine Growth. This causes a 15-foot radius area of vines and thick plants to grow, centered on your barbarian. The vine area will act as difficult terrain for everyone except the barbarian and will actively move with your barb as you move them. Think about this more like an aura of vines that moves with you, not a patch of vines that's going to stay on the ground. It's weird, but you know, wild magic and all that. Teleport. This one allows you to teleport up to 60 feet per turn as a bonus action, which is very, very good. This is basically a Misty Step every turn for your barbarian if you need it, or you can choose to use the bonus action for something else if you don't. This is not a bad one to proc. I have seen some tomfoolery where triggering this effect causes it to proc on every single creature in the area, which can lead to some real shenanigans when your enemies start teleporting around using your wild magic effect. And finally, Dark Tendrils. This is the only effect that doesn't persist through your rage. A bunch of shadow tentacles will lash out from your barbarian's body, slapping the ever-loving hell out of every creature within 30 feet, including your own teammates. Each creature must pass baby's first constitution check or they will take 1d12 necrotic damage. The barbarian will also gain 1d12 temporary hit points. So this is kind of like the Wildheart effect where you dash and gain some temporary hit points. You guys remember Wildheart, one of the other two barbarian subclasses? Yeah, I miss those. Wild magic barbs also get magic awareness, which can be used once per short rest to grant every single creature within 10 feet a 1-turn buff, including your enemies. This buff will allow those creatures to add their proficiency bonus to their saving throws against spells. It currently works on all saving throws, which is probably a bug and may or may not get fixed. This can be pretty good if you position your party to take advantage of it, but there are often many better uses of a bonus action on each turn, and buffing your enemies kinda sucks no matter what. Upon reaching 6th level, you're going to gain 3 more abilities: Bolstering Magic, Boon, level 1 spell slot, and level 2 spell slot respectively. Boon will grant your barb or an ally a 1d4 bonus to all attack rolls and ability checks for 10 turns. It costs an action and can only be used once per long rest, but this is a genuinely good buff to have access to. The level 1 and level 2 spell slot abilities will allow your barbarian to act as a spell slot battery for another spellcaster in your group a few times a day. You aren't going to be able to summon an elemental for free, but getting an extra few spell casts per day is always nice. At 9th level, you will receive the level 3 spell slot version of the same thing. This one is especially nice because Fireball is a level 3 spell. You can now officially charge one single cast of Fireball for a different character who has spell slots per long rest, which is unironically a nice thing. And for the final bonus of the final subclass, Unstable Backlash. While enraged, when you take damage or fail a saving throw, you trigger another wild magic effect that replaces the current one. This actually acts as a reaction, which means that you can have it prompt you anytime this triggers, and you actually get the choice of whether to keep your current wild magic effect or replace it. You don't have to replace it. Anything that allows an additional roll in this game is always great, and being able to roll another wild magic effect and then decide whether or not to change it can be potentially very powerful. This subclass was actually pretty challenging when it came to choosing a representative character. I ended up doing what I usually do, which means that I made up a nonsense excuse for including a character that I like, who I want to talk about, who may or may not actually fit perfectly into the mold of the subclass I'm talking about, but it doesn't really matter in the long run because the characters are usually pretty badass anyway. So let's talk about this one. Wild magic barbarians are known for triggering chaotic magical effects with their rage. I thought about using the Hulk here because his rage can cause gamma radiation to radiate from his body, wreaking havoc on his surroundings even further. But ultimately, I settled on this little lovable Care Bear right here, Atrocitus. Atrocitus is the founder and also leader of the Red Lantern Corps in DC Comics. Now, I would be surprised if most of you haven't heard of the Green Lantern Corps, or at least the character Green Lantern. Hopefully it wasn't this movie that introduced you to the character, even though I will say there was some fun nonsense in there. Still not great, but anyway, you see what I'm getting at. Green Lantern can create green, hard light constructs using his magical ring, which is actually advanced alien technology, but I posit that magic and technology are the same thing after a certain point, so I'm counting this as magic. As you may have already deduced, or maybe you haven't because you're a smooth-brained barbarian like myself, the Red Lanterns have the same exact ability to make light projections, with theirs being red for obvious reasons. rings. The main difference between the rings is the fact that each colored lantern ring derives its power from a different source based on the spectrum of emotions. Green Lantern's rings are powered by the wearer's willpower, allowing heroic and strong-willed characters to perform insane feats of magical power. The Red Lantern ring, on the other hand, is fueled entirely by rage. Atrocitus is one of the most rage-fueled characters in all of DC Comics, and his rage directly manifests as magical energy blasts, mind control, and the creation of literally any objects they can imagine as long as they have the rage to power it. Need more rage. And let me tell you one thing, these guys are so friggin' pissed that their ring actually replaces their hearts, leaving the heart shriveled and useless. Their blood becomes corrupted and acidic, acting as another weapon as they can vomit this rage-tainted blood onto their enemies. The blood is so corrosive that it can actually destroy other lantern rings as well, which is ridiculous. So, you definitely would not want to get any of this crap on you. There are tons of other feats and facts we could go over, but I think I've said enough about Atrocitus. He's a cool character and I recommend looking into his stories further, but right now I want to do something special, because I think I can make a case for a single character who arguably fits all three of these barbarian subclasses. The Ghost of Sparta, the God of War, Kratos. Kratos has demonstrated bestial tendencies and acted purely on instinct for a very long time. He has enhanced senses and physical attributes and is great with animals. His Spartan rage is definitely a berserk frenzy, and it gives him the ability to tear up huge chunks of the earth itself and hurl them at his enemies. When he's not dashing across the room in the blink of an eye to punch that guy in the face, that is. Kratos has been controlled by his rage, and he has also learned to control it and use it to his advantage. Now, as you might expect, the wild magic subclass is a little bit harder to sell like it normally is, just because it isn't represented very well in a lot of media. You don't really see barbarians just like spewing magical powers out. Not in the media that I've seen anyway. Please, if you have a much better example of a wild magic barbarian from anything you've seen or read before, let us know in the comments. I love hearing about stuff like that from you guys. But anyway, I am personally going to justify Kratos as a wild magic barbarian as well, because if you remember back to all of the magical artifacts and abilities that this dude has accrued and acquired over the years, most of them technically are not tied directly to his rage, no, but he is a character who is defined by his rage, and he also has access to magical powers, so boom! And ladies and gents, that's what I like to call good enough. That is it for the Barbarian Deep Dive, travelers. Let us know what builds you're using, how OP Tavern Brawler is, and how awesome it is to throw one guy across the room and kill another guy with him. Like the video if you liked it, subscribe to the channel if you want more content like this, and come join us on the Discord, which is going to be linked in the video description down below. Thank you for watching, and as always, travelers, I am glad you got to see me. Do your best to stay alive out there. Until next time. See ya.